Hi everyone, welcome to Microsoft Sentinel Fundamentals today. We're so excited to be presenting on how to set up Sentinel and how to get it to an almost full-scale implementation. My name is Simona Kovachova. I am a senior cloud security engineer here at Fast Track for Azure at Microsoft. With me, I have my esteemed colleague, Andre.
Hello all. My name is Andre Morel. I am a senior security engineer for Fast Track as well at Microsoft. I will be assisting and doing some demos as my portion. Along with myself, you'll have a senior cloud engineer, security engineer, Rune, in the chat as well. Now, for edification for everyone that's joining the chat, Rune, if you're looking for documents out there that have been written by Microsoft, Rune has probably written maybe 50 to 90% of them. So if you have issues with them, post those in the chat as well, right? But by all means, he'll be answering your questions. He'll be dropping in links for you to assist you. The greatest part about this live session is you have the opportunity for those of you participating in the actual live session to ask questions, have those questions answered. If there's something that rises to the need of demonstration or makes it into the video, we'll be able to demonstrate for everyone. Now, remember, your question may be a question that people have globally, so you have an opportunity to impact how this demonstration goes. We do have canned things that we're prepared to do, but you can definitely drive this session yourself. Go ahead, Simone.
Yeah, definitely. You can also scan this QR code here to access our collection of links that we uploaded. Some of these will cover what we talk about today, as well as some Learn Live or some Learn modules where you can kind of do the exercises and follow step by step a lot of what we're talking about today as well. And before we begin, again, as Andre said, feel free to ask questions. And we do this in our day jobs. So we actually help a lot of large enterprise customers implement Sentinel at scale, as well as our whole Defender and security stack at Microsoft. So really, feel free to ask us whatever you'd like about Sentinel today. Our learning objectives, really briefly, this is what we're going to cover today, just to kind of set the agenda. We're going to start with the more sort of architectural and foundational questions of how to set up Sentinel, as well as the cost implications and how to really optimize that for your organization or for your use cases. And then we'll also go into more of the nitty gritty on data collection and how to turn on data connectors and bring in, Microsoft and Azure native data points, as well as some third-party data points, whatever fits your organization best. And then we'll also talk about responding, detecting, and investigating, as well as all of the things listed here. My colleague Andre will also cover kind of turning on analytic rules, which is really where a lot of the value of Sentinel comes from. After you bring in your data points, what do you do with that data? How do you get alerted? That's all through analytic rules and user entity behavior analytics, which we'll also touch on, as you can see below. And then finally, we'll talk more about the investigation process and how you can really use the incident response panel in Sentinel to get the full value out of the product. And lastly, automation. So once you are alerted on particular behaviors, you may want to actually take action on that. And we'll show you how you can put that final little pin in your Sentinel stack. So with that, I'll cover those key phases that we just talked about. We have collect, detect, investigate, and respond. So we'll be going in that order. We'll start with our collect phase here. So we've kind of summarized again the main bullet points of what we consider the collect phase. And this is really what we usually kind of review as a starting point for any of our first full-scale Sentinel implementations. But before we even go into our collect phase for Sentinel, we like to talk about some of those architectural and foundational considerations that I mentioned. So I'm going to switch my screen to show you some interactive portal demos, as well as some links in our Microsoft Docs. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So not a lot of slides today, just to warn you in case you were really excited about slides. I'm going to pull up my browser here, and I'll go ahead and start with some of the basic design considerations for Sentinel. So kind of going back a step, Sentinel is really a layer that you add on to log analytics. So if you're not really familiar with log analytics, think of it as a queryable data store for all of your logs and all of the insights that you push to log analytics. So usually as a starting point, we either assume that you've created a log analytics workspace for Sentinel and for your other security logs, or perhaps you're starting net new. In that case, you can use one of our tools that I'll talk about in a second, or all-in-one Sentinel tool that does deploy the log analytics workspace for you as well, and Sentinel on top of that. But in general, we have some prereqs that we review kind of, and we have a nice matrix here that I like to look at usually to kind of help decide, how do you want to architect Sentinel? Do you perhaps need Sentinel deployed to multiple log analytics workspaces, or just one that you're going to use as your centralized security, logging store? So we can always drop this link in the chat for you, so don't worry. It's also in our docs, like I mentioned. But usually we kind of review things with geography and isolation, any compliance requirements, like, if you have data in multiple continents, perhaps then you might consider having multiple Sentinel workspaces. Or do you have multiple teams that need to have access to their data, but they're very siloed and you don't want them seeing each other's security or operational data? In that case, it might be a combination of multiple Sentinel workspaces, or using something like role-based access control to limit what they can see in that log analytics workspace, and also to limit what they can see in Sentinel. We'll talk about the roles and permissions for Sentinel itself as well. So we run kind of through these basic considerations. And then, like I said, the big one too is, do you need a new log analytics workspace, or can you leverage an existing workspace and put Sentinel on top of that? So that's another thing to keep in mind, really depending on your organizational use case, as well as the geographies and regulatory compliance requirements that you have to meet. Maybe GDPR applies to your organization. That will also have an effect. And then multiple Azure tenants as well. So if you have multiple Active Directory tenants, you may also need to send each tenant's logs to a separate Sentinel workspace as well. So keep that in mind, as well as the cost the cost implications of Sentinel as well, which we'll talk about in a sec. And then usually, as sort of a general consideration, we talk about storing security versus non-security data in separate workspaces. So for example, this again really depends on your organization, but perhaps you want to store more of the application logging that helps your developers troubleshoot their applications. Maybe you want that data in a separate log analytics workspace, versus more of the performance and maybe the kind of stock operational data for those apps. You might want that in your log analytics workspace that has Sentinel on top of it. Because the big consideration here is, once you add Sentinel onto a log analytics workspace, you will be adding that cost on top. So think about the cost for Sentinel as the log analytics retention cost plus the cost of adding Sentinel on. So it's kind of a twofold total cost that you have to consider when you add Sentinel to a workspace. And I'll briefly show kind of the cost breakdown, and it's all on our pricing page as well. But just to keep that in mind when you think about how you want to separate your data out and where you want to point it, right? And so this does a pretty good job of discussing it, and how you want to segregate your data as well, depending on, again, your organization. So with that in mind, I'm also going to briefly talk about just general cost considerations in pricing. So basically, you can get started for free for the first 31 days. And just try it out and kind of start then maybe ingesting other data points, as well as the Microsoft native ones that I mentioned, and kind of just track how your log analytics retention plus Sentinel costs are impacting your bill, and go from there. So like I mentioned, it's a kind of a twofold equation that I was going to just show you briefly here. And this is our official pricing page. It's accessible online. So as you can see here, it's both the Sentinel cost and the log analytics cost to factor into the total price for Sentinel, really. So as you can see, you have the pay-as-you-go option for log analytics retention, but usually you'll find that one of our commitment tiers might result in cost savings for you as you start ingesting more and more data points as well. And then you'll notice we have different tiers of logs. So when I say tiers, these are all within log analytics itself. So we have the basic log tier, we have the analytic log tier, and the archive log tier. So these also have different cost considerations and different capabilities. So when you're thinking of a more longer term retention strategy as well, this comes into play. And I'll show you this in the portal. I think it might make sense better in there. But as a general kind of guidance, logs will go straight into the analytic log tier in log analytics. That's kind of like the full price you'll get. And then if you want to do basic log tiering for some of your logs, or it's not all log tables support basic logs, but a lot do. What happens with basic logs is they only basically exist for 8 days, and you can query them for 8 days. You can't alert on them, for example, so you don't get like the full Sentinel alerting experience if you send some logs to the basic log tier, but it comes at a great cost savings. And basic logs are ideal for very noisy data points, maybe like network appliance logs, for example, where you just want to query them right away, but perhaps you don't want the full interactive time period that analytic logs might give you, right? And then we have the archive tier too, which I'll mention in the portal as well. So the archive tier really is probably the most cost-effective way for storing your logs longer term in log analytics. You can actually archive them for up to 7 years, as mentioned here. But you will have to do basically like a search job and restore those logs to be able to use them in your alerting and analytic rules again. So that's something to keep in mind. And there are some limitations on how much data you can restore from that archival tier. So with that, I'll pause for a sec just to show you here. We're going to go into kind of Sentinel and log analytics to cover some of the basics. So let's actually just go to log analytics. I'll show you in the portal. We'll pick one of our workspaces that my lovely colleague Andre has set up. So this is an existing log analytics workspace. You can see the region that it's located in. You can even see the pricing tier here. And then when you actually want to take a look at more of these properties and kind of play with your retention, you'll go to usage and estimated costs, and you can see here it'll give you kind of a prediction of how much it'll cost you in the next 31 days, or your estimated monthly costs. And from there you can kind of consider and decide if one of the commitment tiers would make sense for you as well for your organization. And then you can do other things here, like set your workspace data retention. So usually by default, it's about 90 days. That's what we set the retention to, meaning your data will be retained for 90 days within this workspace. You can obviously change this. As you can see here, we can go up to the 730 days, and then we can just save this here. And then if you go back to what I was talking about, though, the different basic and archive tiers as well. So depending on the table, not all log analytics tables support those features. But for example, if we take a look at one of these tables, you'll notice here it'll give you the option to manage the table, for example. And so by default, you'll see that all of the tables, and just also a little context for anyone that's new to log analytics, all of your data points, every log you ingest, it will go into a specific table in log analytics. So depending if it's like third party, if it's a Cisco log, it might go into like the Cisco CL table, CL meaning custom log. All of our native ones will go into something named by the product name, for example. Like you'll see where my cursor is, that's an Azure AD table where all the managed identity sign-in logs reside, right? So back to this table, this is the alert table, meaning all of your alerts. This could be from Defender products as well, like Endpoint or Cloud. Defender for Cloud, they can also go into this alert table. But you'll see they do inherit the 90-day default workspace retention setting that I put in earlier. You can change this. So you could say, hey, I actually want to retain this for more time. It can't be less than the default, right? But you could say, I want to retain these for 270 days. And you'll notice this changes down here. So for 90 days, they'll be in that interactive retention period, which again is kind of like the full price logs where you'll be able to do everything, get the full value out of Sentinel. You'll be able to query them with analytic rules, alert on them, etc. And then after those 90 days, for that remaining 180 days from your 270-day total period, it'll go into the archive kind of tier where you'll have to actually do that data restore job that we talked about earlier, and you'll be able to still search through that data, but you'll have to do the restore first. So I think this illustrates better about what we can do with some of the tiering to help you optimize your cost as well, because archive, like I mentioned, is the most cost efficient. So I'll pause here. And so that's in general.
Samara, are you there?
Sorts of features. We can also go to the tool that I was mentioning to you guys. So let's assume this is completely greenfield. You're just getting started with Sentinel. obviously we're excited to be with you on this journey, right? But you'll notice we do have a GitHub repository with a lot of these materials for you as well. And so I'm just going to preface this. This is a great link to have. It's in the collection, pretty much a one-stop shop. If you don't find something in the portal, it will also be here. But we have this phenomenal tool called the Sentinel All-in-One. So what this does actually, it has a nifty deploy to Azure button. So once you deploy this to Azure and set up some of the parameters you have to fill out, mostly around how you want to name all your resources, it will actually deploy a whole host of resources for you that will get you started with Sentinel within minutes. So it'll create the resource group. It'll create that log analytics workspace that I mentioned. So again, let me caveat this. If you already have one in mind, you can usually skip this step if you've already designated a log analytics workspace that you want to use. Other than that, you can just start net new here with this deployment. And then it'll add that Sentinel layer on top of the workspace, which is literally just a one click, usually in the portal, that you can do anyways. And then it'll set some of that default workspace retention that I showed you, the 90 days, or you can change that as well. The daily cap that it mentions here, basically, that's not always recommended, but of course it's available to you if you want to. You can set an upper bound of how much data you want to ingest in your workspace on a daily basis. For security data, you may not want to always cap it just because it might be relevant for your investigations. But again, just a feature to point out to you. And it'll do a lot of the enabling of analytic rules that my colleague will talk about. And then the big portion here is it actually enables all these data connectors in this list. And these are the majority of the Microsoft and Azure native ones. So if you're using all the Defender stack or part of it, Defender for endpoint, for your servers, whatever it may be, Defender for cloud, it'll go ahead and enable those logs to start being ingested into Sentinel. So then you can go ahead and set up your alerting as well. And then the other nice part is it'll actually enable those rules for you as well to kind of start you strong off the bat. So you're getting those alerts that I'm talking about. And then here it does also describe some of the permissions that you need to enable these connectors. And I'm actually going to segue now into talking about some of these permissions really quick as well. So you'll notice to actually set up data collection for Sentinel, you do need to often be the global admin or security reader for that particular connector. So let's actually briefly go into roles and permissions in Sentinel, just because we're on that topic. And then I'll go into the portal and I'll show you the data connectors and how to get started in that collect phase that we're on now.
Simona, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was waiting for a pause, right? Because you was on this huge rhythm and you went through a lot of material at one time. So I was waiting for an opportunity. I didn't want to be rude, right? Which is outside of my character because I'm natively rude. But no, you did a good job. So there are some key checkpoints that I want all of you to understand, right? First thing first is boundaries. When we talk about security boundaries, because we're about to get into this role-based access control, right? Now you'll see in our cloud adoption framework or our reference architecture for Sentinel that we recommend that you put it in a subscription, right? Don't panic. A subscription is just a security boundary, right? It's an isolation container. This will allow you to have your new set of role-based access control. Because what you're going to notice is all the roles that you have previously had in your management group structure or in your subscription structure, if you just use a resource group, those roles are inherited, right? Now, remember, at some point in your maturity of Sentinel, you plan on expanding this thing so that it has API access to change the configuration of your security tool. What I mean by that is you want it to automatically block IPs. You want it to disable user accounts and or isolate a machine. Now, can you imagine if you extend that access to somebody like Rootnet, right? Who can't be trusted, right? So if you extend that access to someone who is not natively in the SOC and they can't be trusted, right? Then you put yourself at risk, right? Sentinel's an awesome utility, but the amount of access, the amount of control that you give it may cause some concern. So just be aware of that. And when you saw Simona went to the Log Analytics workspace, which was my personal one, by the way, just so you know, she's in there messing with my own stuff. So Simona in there in this Log Analytics workspace, changing it. 90 days are data retention is what you get for Sentinel for free. Anything beyond that 90 days incurs a cost. And what I mean by cost is the total weight of the data that's inside of your Sentinel is what incurs that cost. So if I have data for 180 days, right, on the 91st day, the total weight of data from the 91st day all the way up to 180 will be charged to me. The first 90 days will always be free. So those are some key checkpoints to remember. Remember, isolation containers, role-based access control. If you start in a subscription, you're starting off fresh. If you build a resource group within a subscription you have sort of a dirty resource. Don't panic. If you already have it that way, you can remove those roles as needed, right? Now, the challenge you're going to have for those of you that already have Sentinel in the resource group and have what I call a dirty resource for a security solution like that is a security resource cannot be migrated, right? So in order to move Sentinel to a new subscription, you're going to have to disable Sentinel, remove the security solutions, migrate the log analytics, and then re-enable Sentinel on top of it. That's a lot of heavy lifting. The last checkpoint I'll give you before I let someone go back on her. Hey, she's judging me. Don't judge me on the outside. Everybody's watching this now. This is on recording. All right. So the last thing I'll give you is that if you put it in a separate subscription, you get a completely new cost boundary, right? Because you're looking for chargeback. Sentinel is not just a log analytics and a bunch of artificial intelligence, business intelligence, and machine learning. You're going to use automation, which is going to use logic apps or function apps or some other utility that's going to bring data in or either do automation. So there's additional charges outside of what Sentinel is that is the total cost to your SOC. So having a separate subscription makes sense on several levels. And with that, I'll go back on mute, Simone, and you can begin again.
Thank you. No, that was a really good call out. And I promise Andre and I are friends, so our feelings aren't hurt, but later we'll have a talking. So as you can see also in this architecture diagram here, like Andre mentioned, they've actually put Sentinel in a separate security subscription, shown by the little key there where my cursor is, and then perhaps they have a separate subscription for management, and that's where they actually have a separate operations log analytics workspace. That's the icon for log analytics. So maybe all your performance metrics, like your CPU usage, for example, on all your machines, that maybe should go to your operations workspace in its own management subscription as an idea, versus all of your security logs will go to that Sentinel log analytics enabled workspace, and that will all go in your security subscription. So just an idea, but like Andre said, it really does help with that isolation and boundaries for your data. So we were actually on the roles and permissions topic briefly. So there are actually built-in RBAC roles, role-based access control roles for Sentinel. We'll briefly just touch on them here. They're reader, responder, contributor, playbook operator, and automation contributor. For your SOC team, for example, it really depends on what role they're going to be doing in Sentinel. Most people can get away with a contributor, or even if you want to see the data and like the workbook, which is the visualization of all your Custo queries, or perhaps just a quick overview of the incidents that you have going on in your environment, they may be okay with the Sentinel reader role. If they need to actually change and perhaps, go ahead and close out or remediate some of the incidents, they may need a responder or contributor role, for example. And then the other two at the bottom, operator and automation contributor, those are more for actual connection to logic apps or playbooks that we'll discuss later as the automation component. This is not to be confused with the separate roles for log analytics workspaces. So there's also a log analytics reader and contributor role as well. So you can assign those to people that may need to just perhaps query your data within log analytics, but you don't want them in Sentinel or changing your settings in Sentinel. In that case, you may just want to assign them permissions to log analytics. And the other thing that Andre actually called out here is if you put all these security resources in a separate subscription, then you also need to think about how you're going to assign roles. Will you assign Sentinel contributor at a resource group level for that particular resource group in which Sentinel resides in that subscription, or would you place it at a different level, at the subscription level, for example? So any of these roles can be applied at the different scopes that we support in Azure, but they are inherited, right? So if you deploy something and you assign a role at a subscription level to that resource, then, for example, that will actually trickle down to all the other resources too. So if you say someone's an owner at a subscription, they'll be an owner in all your resources, right, inside of that subscription. So it's worthwhile as you're planning this out to kind of take a look at all the RBAC roles that we support for Sentinel and apply them accordingly to your SOC team or whoever will be looking at Sentinel. Okay. So once we are in Sentinel, let's go back to that in the portal here. we'll go to Andre's demo workspace here where I plan to destroy everything and then he has to set it back up. So sorry, Andre, in advance. We have our content hub. So let's actually start with that. So the content hub, consider this your one-stop shop for all solutions, really. So this will include data connectors. They'll also be bundled up with analytic rules, workbooks. So you'll actually notice we call them all solutions here. So all these solutions are targeting either different products or different scenarios. Andre will talk about our great solutions targeting zero trust and SOC processes as well. So if we pick one, for example, it'll actually tell you if it's installed already, meaning this perhaps was this data source is probably already connected as a data connector, and we also probably have all the analytic rules enabled for it to alert us on this data point. So when we click on one of these solutions, here you'll notice the content types. So these content types are what you'll be installing or what you'll be enabling once you actually install this particular solution. I've already installed this one and I've already connected Active Directory. So maybe we do one that I haven't installed yet. So let's say we want to connect Defender for Cloud. So you'll notice here, it'll give you the install option. So this is one way to actually get started with setting up a lot of these solutions. Once you decide which third party or which native sources you want to connect. So we've installed this particular solution here. And then once it finishes installing, we'll go ahead and take a look at what it actually added to my environment, right?
Simone, if I may.
Yep.
Now, the other cool thing about Content Hub, as Simone is going to get through all the data connectors, if you go to data connectors and you don't see the data connector there, go to the Content Hub, right? Because that's probably where the data connector exists, right? The solution exists somewhere. And the Content Hub has the keyword solution, right? Instead of just having a data connector where you're ingesting data, right? And now that I have the data, what do I do with it, right? How do I look for potential threats in it, right? How do I visualize this data? So that's what Content Hub is. At the end of the day, it has workbooks, which gives you visualizations. There may be hunting queries that you can use for your investigation. There are analytic rules that are built into it that we're going to talk about during our time. And of course, the deployment of the data connector or possibly logic apps. Now, here's the coolest aspect about deploying from the Content Hub. Every single solution that you deploy from the Content Hub is free. Pause for effect. Everybody wait for it. There's a caveat to that, right? So deploying the solutions are free, right? You can deploy everything in the Content Hub for free. But if you start ingesting data with that data connector, of course, that's going to cost you money. If you utilize the playbook for every trigger of your playbook, the trigger costs money, right? They're consumption triggers. But the deploying the solution is free, 100% free to deploy from the Content Hub. Back to you, Simone.
Yeah, awesome point. And I was saying we should probably just illustrate this here, what Andre is talking about. So once you actually go to the solution that you've installed, right, you'll notice that it actually shows you the content type here. So we have actually connected our Azure Active Directory logs to this Sentinel workspace. So we are ingesting those data points. And then these are all the analytic rules that pertain to this data source that will also be added to our environment that we can also enable. So these will look for different types of exploits or vulnerabilities or important changes that you should be alerted on, like privileged role assignments and escalations and potential lateral movement, all awesome parts of the MITRE attack framework that I know Andre will mention as well. And so you're always able to go ahead and you can remove these solutions. You can, you'll periodically have to update them as well when there's new versions of the rules that come up, or maybe there is a change to the data connector that's been implemented. But you'll be notified if there are things that need updates here in the Content Hub. So once you've installed some of the solutions that you're interested in, for example, or you just want to go ahead and get started enabling your connectors, which is again, we're still in the collection phase, right, of your data points. So I'm actually going to go ahead and filter to the data sources I've already connected, just to kind of show you some basic setup here. Since we're picking on Azure Active Directory today, you'll notice it pulls up the connector page here. It also tries to show you some of the related content here on the left-hand side. For other things you can enable as a next step, or maybe you've added it all through the Content Hub already. In that case, you just have to go and make sure those rules are configured as you wish for them to be configured. And you'll notice here, since I've already connected this, I can see when I've last received data to this, to the log analytics that's underneath Sentinel here. We can see the last time that it received data. So apparently, 5 minutes ago, which this is pretty normal. We'll have to check and see why the audit logs are a bit delayed. And you'll notice, depending on the connector, you'll have to have certain permissions to enable the log collection here. So for a lot of these Azure Active Directory or the Defender Suite ones, you do need to be global or security admin. This is at the Azure AD level, not to be confused with regular Azure roles. This is in the Active Directory side of the house. And you'll notice you can enable all or one of these log types, whatever meets your organizational needs or your SOC team's needs. Some of these can be very noisy log sources, so keep that in mind. Just monitor your, your retention, your cost here as well over time, just to see how much logs you're collecting there. And also, you can always disable these. So if you feel like, hey, I maybe don't want non-interactive sign-in logs, right? You can always uncheck this and save it again. And it will update accordingly. I'll pause. Andre, did you want to add anything about any of these connectors, or should I just?
No, I just have one quick additive for this. I promise you this one will be quick. I am he who says a lot of words, but I promise you I'll minimize my words because I have my own time to talk. But for everyone in here, right, Microsoft allows you to have a unified single pane of glass at no cost. You can bring in every single security alert from all of our products into Sentinel at no cost. So the question is, should I have Sentinel? The answer is yes. Everybody should be running Sentinel if you're running the Microsoft suites, because you can have a single pane of glass at no cost. If you have enough engineers that can monitor 7 security tools, you're awesome, right? But that's 7 security tools: Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender for Office 365, you have Defender for Identity, you have Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, you have Defender for Cloud, and the list goes on. So how do you get all of these alerts into a single pane of glass so we can all operate together and use Fusion technology, which I'll talk about during my time, in order to determine if you have a multi-stage attack? So that's where Sentinel comes in. And remember, security alerts are free. There are free data connectors inside of Sentinel. On top of security alerts, also Azure activity logs, which is a big deal. And we'll talk about it a little bit more during my time. That's it, Simone, I promise you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Like Andre mentioned, for pretty much all of our security Defender products, the security alerts, and you'll notice that's denoted by the data type. It's usually called security alert if you look at the bottom of my left-hand side screen. Those are all the free data source you can ingest. Now, if you're looking at more of the raw data from 365 Defender products, so let's actually go to one of those connectors. This is the 365 Defender connector. This encompasses all of them: Defender for Identity, Endpoint, Office 365, Cloud Apps, etc. So basically, if you go down here, all of these, what I call more of the raw logs, right? Not just the canned alerts that the product generates for you, depending on these logs. If you want like device info, file events, all of this, there is a cost for ingesting these particular logs, though. So just the alerts are free, that Andre mentioned, as a clarification. And by enabling a lot of these or all of these Defender products to flow into Sentinel, we're also enabling incident connection and kind of a bi-directional sync, meaning if you remediate the incident in Sentinel, it should also remediate in our Defender products and vice versa. So you're really able to kind of stick to Sentinel, for example, as your single pane of glass, where you investigate, remediate incidents, and then that's also remediated on the corresponding Defender product side as well. So it's a great feature with Sentinel and all of these Microsoft products here. Again, you can also connect any third-party ones that you are using in your environment. As you notice, there's so many here. I'm not going to go through all of them, and the majority that we've enabled here are obviously Microsoft ones, but you can go ahead and connect your third-party sources. So most third-party sources have 2 main ways of connecting to Sentinel, via syslog, for example. So I'll just show you this one really quickly here. Syslog and common event format, Ceph log forwarding. So that's the one way. And the other way for log collection to happen from a third party is also via like API call. For that, you'll have to use a function. Most of our third-party connectors already have the function created for you. So you just have to deploy that function in your Azure environment and set it up. I can give you an example really quickly, but for syslog and Ceph collection, you'll have to install the Azure Monitor agent on your, usually we recommend Linux boxes for most of these use cases. So you'll install the agent on that machine, and then you'll follow some of the scripts that we offer to help set this up. I can actually pull up that particular instruction set here. Give me one sec. So right here, common event format via AMA. So you'll notice the full instruction set should be here, and you'll have to create your data collection rule as well to specify which logs are being collected. So you'll notice here in the resources section, these are the machines that you're collecting the logs from. So if you have multiple log forwarders, for example, that are pulling logs out of your, whatever third-party appliance you want to use as an example, those log forwarders will have to be specified here because we're collecting their logs into Sentinel. And those first, you're forwarding the logs from the third party to the forwarder, and then the forwarder is pushing them into log-analytics, and then we have them in Sentinel as a result. You'll have to also specify which facilities and your minimum log level that you want to collect from that log forwarder. So usually, if you're not sure what facility those third-party logs may be going to on your forwarder, kind of do a trial and error process. Ingest the log facilities that you suspect, and then look through your logs in log-analytics with a Kusto query and check the facility fields. When Andre shows you more about Kusto querying, you'll see that all of these facilities are marked in a specific field in your log entry, so you'll know where they're going. And so from there, you can kind of prune out the ones that you don't need logs to be collected from, and that will also help optimize your cost. So pro tip there with data collection rules. And then this is this is the installation for and configuring that Ceph collector, which again is powered by the new Azure Monitor agent for logging. So that's one major way with third party. The other one is through functions. So let's actually look at one that I know is definitely through function. Let's see here. So you'll notice some of them do specify if it's done via Azure function, as the Cisco Secure Endpoint one is, for example. So for all of these, if you don't see your third party listed in data connectors, like Andre said, go search in Content Hub, and the solution is probably there. You can install the solution, and then the instructions should show up in data connectors for you once you search after you install the solution. And you'll notice most of these will have you deploy that Azure function, which is just a piece of like serverless code, just makes an API call to that third-party product, Cisco in this example. And usually you'll have to provide some kind of API key. In this case, as you can see here, we have to provide the API key, the client ID, the host name, etc. And usually you have to also provide your log-analytics workspace key. So log-analytics workspaces will have two keys usually, and you can provide one of those and just regenerate those periodically, as is a good security best practice. And so you can deploy the function manually or just use the deploy to Azure button here. And then you'll have to go ahead and just verify that you've configured all of the application settings that we just talked about, like the API key. And from there, once you've connected this up, you should start getting log ingestion into log-analytics from that third party. So again, two main ways: syslog, Ceph, and then via Azure function to ingest third-party data sources, for example. Andre, did you want to add anything else on that one before we transition?
Oh, no, I have nothing really to add. Just letting them know that you have to define data in Sentinel into two different categories, right? There is utility data and there's useful data. Useful data are things that you're going to use as a SOC engineer to do your investigation with, but Sentinel itself may not use it, right? It don't have any utility to it, right? So that data should not go into Sentinel. It's going to cost you a lot of money to store that data. Utility data is data that's actually going to relate to analytic rules that either you write or analytic rules that are pre-canned inside of Sentinel that you use, right? So if you have a data point and you don't have an analytic rule that utilizes it, then that data should be stored elsewhere. And this is how you optimize and maximize your spend inside of Sentinel.
Awesome. Yes, thank you for that. And now I think we are able to go from collection into our next phase. So Andre, if you want to take over, let me just briefly show what our next phase is to the audience. We have detect as our next phase. So Andre will talk about analytic rules and hunting queries and watch lists. So Go ahead, Andre, all yours.
Well, you asked me a question right before my face, and I wasn't ready. I was got to get hyped up for it and everything. All right, everybody, buckle your seatbelts. Now, most of you or some of you may already be familiar with this. Remember, we're never going to go beyond a 200 level explanation here. There may be an opportunity where we flash elements of 300 level, if that. But the most part, what we're trying to get to you is the fundamentals of Sentinel, right? Remember what we're trying to achieve here. Now, do not lose sight of your ability to ask questions in the chat, have your questions be surfaced forward, and have us do demonstrations. Hopefully, everybody can see my screen. Now that we have the data in, right, and we've ensured that we maximize our spend and we've brought in the right data. Now, what is the right data? Well, at the end of the day, we've been doing interconnected computers for over 50 years. No one knows what the right data is, right? No one knew Log4j was going to be an issue until Log4j became an issue. So no one knows what the right data is. So the easy way to figure that out in Sentinel is, of course, to use the utility versus useful, right? Maybe useful for an investigation, but Sentinel is not going to have, Sentinel's not going to take that data point and make a decision, right? And for that, we use analytic rules. And analytic rules are based off KQL, and it's more of a if this, then that style scenario, right? If this exists, then it means this indicator of compromise. May not be a true compromise itself, but it's an indicator thereof, worthy of an investigation, right? So how do I speed this up? How do I get Sentinel to do something for me? Because you may think after you've had all your data connectors that all of a sudden Sentinel is doing something awesome. I'm gonna be honest with you. Sentinel's doing nothing for you at that point, right? You just have a very expensive storage account. So how do I get Sentinel to do something for me? Well, one of the first things you need to do is go down to your settings button. And once you get to your settings button, you're gonna go to the settings pane. And in the settings pane, you're gonna turn on a feature called User Entity Behavioral Analytics. This is gonna be one of the first things you wanna turn on, right? Now, this is gonna turn on some anomaly analytic rules. And we'll get into what analytic rules are and why you turn this on in a minute. Now, you need to be a global administrator or security administrator in order to turn this on. There is data for Microsoft Defender for Identity. That's what this is. It says Active Directory, I know, but this is Microsoft Defender for Identity data connector. You have to have that data connector on in order to turn this feature on. There's one for Azure Active Directory, and what it's really pulling for Azure Active Directory are your audit logs and your sign-in logs. Now, there's two other data points that it specifically points out, but believe me, it uses more. That's the Azure activity logs and the security events. Now, let me explain to you why you want to bring in the Azure activity logs first. They're free, right? They're free to ingest. It costs you absolutely no dollars to ingest. You can keep up to 90 days without an additional cost, so it makes sense to bring in Azure activity logs. On top of that, this dictates, or this lets me know who is doing what inside of Azure. I.e., Samana told me yesterday that she doesn't mess with my Sentinel at all, but we've all seen on video now. She's on video messing with my personal Sentinel. She swore she don't mess with my Sentinel at all. But we're going to use our SIEM technology, Sentinel, to detect if she's actually messed with my Sentinel. I promise you, right? Like Maury, survey says that was a lie. We're going to figure out that she's actually messed with my Sentinel the entire time. All right, but Azure Activity Logs has to do with someone doing something inside of Azure. And the security events are what's coming out for your system, right? After you turn this on, right, it's going to turn on anomaly analytic rules, right? And what are these anomaly analytic rules? Well, let's go take a look at them. Hopefully this loads up fast. Pause for a dramatic effect as it loads up to an analytic rule pane. All right, so these are the anomaly analytic rules, right? Based off user entity behavior analytics, right? The analytic rules point to specific data points, right? It tells you where in the MITRE attack sequence they can be found, right? It tells you how often they run, and of course, a positive score. Now, this is not just your audit events or your sign-in logs. As you can see, the data sources are different. There's Office 365, there's DNS, there's security events, but this automatically turns on those anomaly rules for you so that Sentinel starts working on your behalf. Even if you know nothing about analytic rules, you know nothing about SOC operations, you know nothing about investigation or anything to detect an indicator of compromise, this forces Sentinel to do something for you. Well, why user entity behavior analytics? Well, user entity behavior analytics is looking for anomalies. At the end of the day, it's building a profile on your entities. And those entities can be IP addresses, they can be systems, they can be users, they can be URLs, they can be anything that's found inside of an actual incident. And it builds a profile on it. Now, it takes about 30 days of encrypted data to start that profile. Some of it takes up to 180 days. Now, why use user entity behavior analytics as my precursor to building out my Sentinel rules as a SOC operator? Well, I'm looking for 0 days. Let's be clear. I am looking for 0 days. Now, if I was to tell you that Sentinel detects 0 days, right, I have a $1 trillion product. So I'm not going to tell you that it detects 0 days, right? 52 or 54 years of interconnected computers, we haven't been able to solve the 0-day issue. The closest thing we can get to solving 0 days is looking for anomalies, when behaviors change, right? If this system is acting totally different than these other systems, why? When did it start? Let me get to patient 0 a lot faster. If this user, i.e. Simona, right? Simona and Rune, they can't be trusted. All right, if these users are doing something they say they're not, right? How do I detect when they're working off hours? How do I detect when they're accessing things they shouldn't access, right? Insider threat style stuff, right? How do I detect these things? And that's where anomalies come in. Now, if I move past anomalies, right? Now I'm at the maturity model. I have Sentinel. Sentinel has deployed a lot of rules for me. The anomaly detection is in there. I want to build my own analytic rules. Where there are pre-canned analytic rules inside of your Sentinel environment, right? All of them point to the MITRE attack sequence, right? You can add a filter. Now, when I talk about the MITRE attack sequence, I'm talking about the MIT team that came up with what APTs do, right? They take credit for it. Mandate and Fire, I can argue about who researched it first, but they take credit for it. And they have the MITRE website, right? So what also security engineers have done is we've mapped our KQL queries to detect the signatures of those type of attacks, right? If you're familiar with these techniques, i.e. 1486, you find to be your ransomware, right? The data encryptor or the impact of data encryption across your environment. So these are rules that directly relate to signatures of known threats, right? And you can add those in. The good thing about this is you can actually filter by severity, anywhere from high to informational. You can filter by tactics, whether you want to start in the initial access phase or whether you want to go to the impact phase to see if there are any analytic rules that directly impact your system. You can filter for the technique that we just showed you, the rule type, or even the data source, right? So let's say that I just uploaded my Palo Alto data points, and I want all the analytic rules that refer to my Palo Alto data point. Now I'm gonna have to zoom out a little bit. Hope you don't mind, just so I can get to that data source. I want to choose Palo Alto, right? And what this does is, if there are any rules in there that directly reflect my Palo Alto, it'll allow me to check, select those rules, right? Now, I did Palo Alto Cortex, and it didn't have any rules in there. So does that mean that Sentinel doesn't have any Palo Alto Cortex rules? Well, no. In fact, if I go to the Content Hub, see, Simone and my conversation started to intervene. Well, I told you, Simone, I wasn't just cutting you off. I had some really good stuff to tell the team. All right. So if I go into Content Hub and I put in Palo, right? Palo Alto Cortex is there. And it says that if I deploy this Content Hub solution, it's going to give me, zoom in a little more so you can see it, it's going to give me 10 analytic rules. Now remember, pre-canned, built inside of Sentinel, there were none. But this is going to deploy for me 10 analytic rules that directly reflects the data point that I'm going to ingest. Now remember, I use that term, utility versus usefulness, right? Because if I bring in Palo Alto Cortex and I never utilize that data point, I've spent a lot of money for that for no reason, right? A lot of money just to store that data. And if you want to just store the data, put it in a storage account, right? It's going to give me 2 data connectors, and it's going to give me hunting queries, which we'll talk about later. Now, that is an approach, right? And I see customers go to analytic rules and they add in the analytic rules using the approach of filtering for whatever they think they need, right? Of course, given all the anomaly rules they have. Or I see customers create those rules, right? Now, if you're going to create the rule, you can create anything from a scheduled query rule to a near real-time rule or a Microsoft instant creation rule. Now, remember when Simone was talking about those free data points, the Microsoft data points? Well, if you bring in security alerts for the Microsoft data points, the rule that is going to be used to generate those alerts into incidents is going to be the Microsoft instant creation rule, right? So basically what it does is goes to the security alerts table and says anything comes in from your security tool, right? Instead of it being an alert, surface it to an incident. Now that's a key point to remember in Sentinel. Sentinel doesn't surface alerts. The alerts are inside of the data. You can query for the alerts. Sentinel surfaces incidents. So quick explanation so that we're all on the same sheet of music, right? So if I if I wake up in the morning, that's an event, right? If I wake up late, that's an alert, right? I just woke up late. Not a big deal right now, right? Maybe if I wake up late too many times, then this is probably a cause for concern. An incident is if I wake up, but I woke up late and then I show up late for work. Now that's an incident that warrants an investigation, right? As Simona would tell you, I show up late for work all the time. Shh, don't tell my manager. All right, so this is how we classify events versus alerts versus incidents. Well, the security tools actually generate alerts as Sentinel sees it. In order for Sentinel to actually bring it to your SOC's attention so that they can investigate it, they have to turn them into incidents. And that's where this rule comes in. A near real-time rule is actually a scheduled query that queries every minute, right? It queries every minute. Now, the reason it's called near real-time because there's 60 seconds of breathing room in there. So it's not real-time data, right? It's querying every minute to see if there's any indicator of compromise within the data set that it has, right? But there is a 60-second window, and the most you can create of those is 50. Then you have scheduled queries. Now, we're going to do the scheduled queries after we use Simona's scenario where we go through and prove that she's been accessing my Sentinel for a very long time, right? The intent of this is to expose her for accessing my Sentinel when she did not, because Sentinel is not just a security solution, it's actually a scene. Her accessing my Sentinel is an event, and I just want to check and see if she's telling the truth. So we're going to do that as part of our demo. Now, yes, I can add these rules piecemeal, one at a time, based off my data source, based off the tactics techniques. The best approach to that is to use our MITRE attack panel. Now, our MITRE attack panel, if I can talk correctly, breaks down the analytic rules all the way across the board from reconnaissance all the way down to impact, right? Now, you see, it tells me that I'm looking at active queries, both near real time, anomalies, and scheduled queries. And I have some already built in. If you look in your panel, you may not see any analytic rules built in, or you may see some, but you see a lot of zeros here, right? Now, for those of us that worked in the cyber kill chain back in the day, Lockheed Martin, there were 7 steps, right? Initial access or reconnaissance phase, initial access, so forth and so on. This was a scientific method approach to harden our environment or to look for potential threats or indicators of compromise. That's what the MITRE attack preview provides for you, a scientific approach. And the reason this scientific approach is because MIT students are actually doing scientific research to populate what these threat actors are doing. And Microsoft security engineers also are mapping our queries to reflect what these attacks are doing. Well, how do I get to fill these zeros, right? Well, that comes with the simulation, right? Because we have pre-built-in analytic rules, you can click analytic rules and it will automatically highlight all the possible analytic rules that Microsoft has in this section. For instance, you see the number 90 as far as valid accounts. I click valid accounts. It'll tell me the description, my actual adversary, right? Valid accounts, what the adversary likes to do, and it provides you a hyperlink. Now, the coolest thing about this hyperlink is that this is actually a hyperlink directly to the MITRE attack technique in the MITRE.org website. Directly to it. Now, for those of you that have gone to that website, right, none of us have memorized any of this. If you have, right, sorry, I didn't mean to be generalist on that one. It is impossible to memorize everything on the MITRE attack website, right? So you need links to those stuff and you need justification as to why you add those rules. Because as you move into the boardroom, someone's going to ask you, well, how did you build your Sentinel? I built it in a scientific method. I used the MITRE attack crosswalk and I addressed every phase of an attack based off the MITRE attack recommendations, right? Based off the MITRE attack work recommendation. It'll tell you where you are in the attack phase, and it'll tell you what your active coverage is. Now, you'll notice something, right? Remember I told you turn on user entity behavior analytics and anomaly detection. I automatically have 20 rules in that section just because I turned that on. Sentinel is working for me if I turn on UEBA first. Everybody's with me so far, right? This is a key indicator. If you've been working on Sentinel and you've had Sentinel built for the past 6 months, 3 months, and you have not maximized user entity behavior analytics, you need to do that, right? This is Sentinel working on my behalf already. And then it also tells me I have a simulated coverage of about 62. So what that means is Microsoft has 62 pre-built rules that you can actually leverage that helps you out. So let's take a look at it. You can jump in anytime you want to. Don't worry right, we're going to get to the point where I show the audience that you've been messing with my Sentinel the whole time. I just want to teach you a few things first. All right, so I can do anything, so all this does was, for those of you that remember where we went first, it took rule templates, and remember the filters that I went through, the techniques, the tactics, and then the rule type. All it did was add those filters in for me automatically. Within here, I can add in the analytic rules that make sense. Now, customers always ask me, why don't I just add all the analytic rules, right? Well, that's the chaos theory. The more analytic rules you add, right? Analytic rules are 100% free themselves. The analytic rules don't cost you anything, but the more analytic rules you add, the more chaos you're going to have, because you have to get to a form of normalization, meaning you have to get to a point where you don't have false positives. If you add 1024 analytic rules, that is 1024 analytic rules you have to normalize. You have to find a way to reduce the false positives in it. And we'll get to watch this and talk about how to get some of those false positives out. Now, this tells you the actual name that is inside of the MITRE attack. It'll tell you what type of rule it is. We just covered schedule from NRT. It'll even tell you the data source that it uses, right? And these are not just Microsoft data sources. Okta is in it, Sentinel-1 is in it, and all types of data sources, third parties to be included. It'll tell you where in the tactics or techniques it exists and give you the opportunity. You click it, hold on for a second. Wait for it. Give you the opportunity to see if you have that data in use. Now, remember, Simone was talking about earlier, decide if you want to keep on non-interactive sign-ins or what data points you want to keep on, right? So how do I know? I'm a SOC engineer. I don't know what data points to add, so I'm just going to add everything, and I'm going to balloon my costs, and I'm going to blame Rudine, right? Remember, I don't take credit for failure, so always blame Rudine for something. So I'm going to blame Rudine, because he's the one talking in the chats, for all the money that I spent in my environment. So how do I justify spending this money? Well, you justify it with the utility, right? Because you go to your senior manager and you says, well, I want to use this analytic rule, because this is a threat that is prevalent in our industry, whether it be educational, government, or whatever. And in order to use this analytic rule and to maximize this analytic rule, I need these data points. Does that make sense so far? Everybody with me? All right, cool. So you can add the rule. Now remember, the analytic rules cost you absolutely nothing. These are free 99. You can add as many as you want. The only thing you have to concern yourself with is alert fatigue, because you're going to make a whole bunch of alerts, and it's going to take you a while to get to normalization on these things, right? So my recommendation is to start with the MITRE crosswalk, right? Start from the initial access phase and walk all the way through till you get to the impact phase, right? The expectation is not that you add in 1,000 rules, but you add in the rules that make sense to you and your industry initially. Once you're done with that aspect of adding in these analytic rules, then you want to move into a scenario-based approach. So what do I mean by that? Well, the most prevalent scenario out there is ransomware. Pause for effect. Everybody should be going, ooh, ah. So Simone, you gotta be animated. They can see you on camera, so everybody can go ooh or not. All right. So the most prevalent attack out there is ransomware, right? It's the most pervasive. It's the most prevalent. Everybody's doing it right now. There's what we call landmine attacks out there, where there's just proxy emails and things that just come to your emails. You click them, and all of a sudden you've downloaded a whole bunch of stuff that initiates a random ransomware attack, and you weren't even primarily targeted. You just tripped over a landmine for ransomware, right? So how do I do that? Remember those technique numbers? I think Saul asked about it in the chat. Remember those technique numbers that I was typing before? Well, 1486. Now I don't know many by heart, but I know ransomware, right? That is ransomware, right? It tells you here, adversaries may encrypt your data, target systems, pull your data, or whatever, right? So yes, we have analytic rules pre-built that target ransomware. Now these analytic rules are not on by default. I turn mine on. If you have Sentinel right now, type in T if you want to, or 1486. That is the MITRE attack number for ransomware. Type in 1486. You'll see that you have a big 0 over there. There are pre-built analytic rules that look for this type of attack, and you don't have them, right? Remember the process. View the analytic rule. Wait for the magic flash to kick in. Okay, here we go. It's moving slowly. All right. Wait for the magic. View the analytic rule and add the analytic rules that make the most sense to you. If you have the data point, right, by all means, add them in. And they're not just Microsoft data points. As you see, Cisco ASA is included in some, and there will be some others, Zscaler and things like that. But add the analytic rule that makes sense. Now, let me explain to you about this approach, right? Because we've already done the MITRE crosswalk. You have to do your due diligence. You have to do your due care, right? So you did your MITRE crosswalk. You walked into your boardroom. You have a scientific method for which you built Sentinel. You added in user entity behavior analytics, and you allowed Microsoft to pre-deploy a bunch of anomaly detection rules so that you can look for 0 days, right? Basically, you're looking for anomalies, right? When things change. And then you went to do a scenario attack, and the first thing you did was add in data encryption. Now, everybody see where this is, right? This is at the impact stage of your environment. If you're detecting ransomware at the impact stage of your environment, you have somewhere around, I like to everyone, you have about 30 minutes to save your job, right? Because now you need to be able to tell them the blast radius. You need to be able to tell them that you have isolation or patient 0, and that you can return to normal operations if this is where you're detecting ransomware, right? What you need to do is a full ransomware scenario, right? Like a human actor ransomware scenario. Ransomware is sitting here, but ransomware starts a long time prior to this. For instance, if I change my technique number and I go to, for instance, 1566, right? Again, there's only like 3 or 4 of them I know by heart. I got a document written up for them. Ask Rune for it. He should write the document soon, right? If the document's not good, again, blame Rune or Simona. Don't blame me for anything. All right. So remember I told you about those landmines, right? They're just sending out things. They're already out in the wild. The one thing I can't control inside of my environment are the users. They're the riskiest thing in my environment, and I can't control them, right? So how do I monitor for the attack before it gets to the ransomware? Well, I'm going to check for phishing. Yes, I have Office 365 out there, Defender that's out there doing for it. And yes, I have that anomaly rule that Microsoft already provisioned. But there are 5 additional analytic rules that's going to use a correlation of data points. Wait for the magic of Azure to kick in. We'll see the correlation. All right. So now, instead of just looking at Office 365 data point, right? I can have my own. I can combine my Azure Monitor, my ASA, my Palo Alto, my Zscaler. Now, for those of you that are not new to this, you realize this is edge device. This is all the way at the edge. I can catch the ransomware attack or the precursors to the ransomware attack before it even happens if I go through the MITRE attack sequence. What if I look at 1003? Remember, that's like credential theft or something. There it goes. OS credential dumping, right? Some of that mini cat stuff that you guys are used to, right? Text and passwords and clear text and things like that, right? Again, this one I don't have any anomaly rules, right? But there are a lot of pre-built in schedule rules that I can use. If it ever loads up, you'll see it. All right. So now that you see it, right? Now you can see these things. So at the end of the day, after I set all these rules and Sentinel is doing this job, right? What does Sentinel do for me? Well, Sentinel tells you that there may be indicators of compromise. There are still things that you need to do. So for that, we're going to jump into investigation. We're going to take a look at investigation. I'm going to tell you about some key points that you need to adhere to. Don't worry, someone. I'm going to give you some time for automation as well, right? Now, this is a panel where it gives you your alerts, right? It's going to tell you all your alerts based off those analytic rules that you've added in. The severity is based off Microsoft Security Engineer recommendations. The incident numbers only matter to when the incident actually came in. This is the sequence of when the incident came in. It's not the priority of the incident at all. The incident title matches the analytic rule that you've provisioned, and the number of alerts is the correlation of the alerts. Now, it also tells you where it got that alert from, whether it be from Sentinel or the product. Now, why is that important? Well, if it tells me it got the alert from Cisco ASA, that's on the edge device, right? That's a packet I can stop. I have time to react to that. If it tells me it got this alert from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, well, now we have an issue, right? That's a horse of a different color there. That's something we need to address right now, right? That is something on Endpoint that says there's a file, registry, or something that may have been modified that I immediately need to either stop, isolate, or at the bare minimum, investigate, right? IP address block, right? We talked to the network team and figure it out. Endpoint protection, oh no, we have an issue, right? Panic. Well, don't really panic. All right. So I have a few in here. Let's say insider threat, right? Now, unbeknownst to Simona, I put insider threat inside of my environment in order to monitor my buddies, right? Because though I don't trust threat actors, the individuals I trust less than threat actors happen to be my buddies, right? They can't be trusted. Security engineers cannot be trusted. Anytime they get a chance to spend your security money and not their security money, they will, right? So I found insider risk where Simona was prevalent, right? Because she said she hadn't touched it till today, right? Just doing it for this demo. So I turned on insider threat. Now, in your investigation, it's going to give you a severity. It's going to give you a status, right? The status is going to be new, active, or closed, right? If you change the status to active, right, this changes all the statuses for that particular alert to active, and that means you're actively doing an investigation. You can change it to close, and when you change it to close, Microsoft is looking for a classification. True positive, meaning that there's something suspicious that you actually resolve, but non-positive. Now, you're going to see this a lot when you're investigating identity protection things, right? If I see identity protection out there, there's going to be if I'm using a VPN, I'm going to get atypical travel, impossible travel, because I'm in Florida, but the VPN provision is in Wisconsin for some odd reason. So I'm going to get those. So they're going to be some benign positive, meaning it is suspicious, but it's expected because I'm utilizing VPN for that user. If you're getting a lot of that, you're going to have to move to the point of doing reducing false positives. Then you have false positive, incorrect alert logic. Then you're going to get false positive, incorrect alert logic, right? Now, what that does is actually feeds Microsoft back saying, hey, whatever you put for the analytic rule is not right. I'm getting wrong data, fix it, right? This tells our security engineers we need to improve the product. Same thing when it goes to false positive, incorrect data, right? These two are Microsoft needs to fix the product. The alert isn't working like it should. Now, there is one that says undetermined. I'm going to ask the product team to remove this one because no SOC engineer should be put in undetermined. Either it is a compromise or it's not a compromise. Either it's a false positive, a benign, or it's a true positive. There is no undetermined. You should not be closing any events as undetermined inside your environment, right? If it's undetermined, leave it open because it's not determined yet, right? Wants additional investigation. All right. You can also do an assignment, right? And in this instance, anybody that's inside of my tenant, I can assign it to. Now, I generally assign all of my stuff to Barry Allen, right? For those of you that are looking forward to the Flash movie coming out, Barry Allen, right? He's the fastest engineer I got. Someone do not judge me. That was a funny joke. That was not a dad joke. That was seriously a funny joke. All right. So I assigned it to Barry Allen. He's the fastest engineer I got. I always assign to Barry Allen, right? Then it's going to tell me the number of events that were triggered inside of this scenario, right? Remember, events I woke up, or alerts I woke up late. Of course, instance is something that is surfaced because it's an anomaly. It's going to tell me the analytic rule. Now, the reason it posts the analytic rule here, because if I keep changing the severity of this analytic rule over and over and over again, then obviously I need to stop changing the severity of the analytic rule at the GUI. I need to go to the analytic rule itself and change the analytic rule so it stops surfacing it as a medium, right? Now, I have additional things going on inside my environment, right? I have tagging, I have alert enrichment, and I have automation that adds notifications and instructions about triage, right? You can do that later on. But anyway, so when I go look at this instance, I want to see if any of these incidents have occurred that, you know, may have users in it. And I'm telling you, this is Simona. You have to trust me. She's a threat actor, right? Wait for the magic of Azure. I think this is not the one. Go back, Simona. I'm telling you, I'm going to prove to everyone that you can't be trusted.
Yeah, I'm going to run up your Sentinel, Bill.
I know. You're the one doing it. You're telling everyone you're not doing it, but you're the one doing it. All right. So on top of this, when you get to an investigation, pane, right, you have the ability to do a full-on investigation. All right. Let's change this one. And let's take a look at, let's say, slide this over. There it goes. Brute force. Let's take a look at brute force. All right. So in the instant pane, it's going to tell you the last time it was updated, last time it was created. It's going to tell you all the entities that were involved. Now, this is actually a brute force by a botnet. It's going to add tags if there was any threats found. Give me one that actually has a threat on it. Right now, for me, I've added additional information. Right, so now when I go in investigation pane for an actual analytic rule, not just an insider threat where I'm looking for someone because she's doing suspicious things. Right, again, assign this to Barry Allen. All right, it's like peer pressure for everybody to go watch the movie. Right, it's not a Flash movie; it's a Batman movie. Go watch it. All right, so we're gonna. I assign it to Barry Allen. Now I'm doing my investigation. Right, I get to see on the right hand side all the entities that were involved in this scenario. Right, the IP addresses, the user accounts that were used to enumerate, right? So I know For those of you that got the default admin, I remove the admin or I block the IP address. Normally, if you have a brute force attack, it's because you have a public-facing IP address, you need to reduce it. On top of that, it's going to tell me all the similar incidents that relate to this, right? And generally, it's related based off entities or based off alert type. Now, for me, I've added automation. My automation does several things. One of the things my automation does is it brings in ChatGPT. I seen inside the chat that Rune brought up ChatGPT as a resource. I use ChatGPT. Now, don't mind the spelling here. This is my Carolina spelling. It happens. All right. So this is my ChatGPT automation. And what it does for me is it provides recommendations of how to triage this. So if I have a very new SOC team or they're just new to this environment and they're training, I can add recommendations of how to actually react to an incident to it from ChatGPT. And of course, you can get as creative as you want to about what you want to do with ChatGPT. Well, I take it a step further. I also have alert enrichment. Now, I'm using alert enrichment from my Alien Vault, right? Now, for those of you that work in the SOC environment, right? But those of you that work in the SOC environment, you actually go to like Whois and all these other things. You may even go to Alien Vault to do your alert enrichment. Now, the intent is to get to patient zero a lot faster. So how soon can I equip my security engineers with enough information to do their job? ChatGPT, steps to get it done. Alert enrichment tells you if this IP address is compromised or not, right? And the cool thing about this is, let me go ahead and copy this. This is directly from Alien Vault, right? If I go to Alien Vault, you'll see that I'm actually dropping this IP address in, and I'm getting all these pulses, right? That it's been used as port scan, it's been using honeypots and things like that, right? Now that I have this IP and I have some degree of confidence that it is compromised because I used a threat intelligence platform, I can start doing some incident actions. And one of the incident actions I can do is create a Teams chat. Now I can bring in engineers that weren't involved before. Because remember, I'm the SOC engineer. I don't own the network device. I only own my security solution. So how do I get the right people in? Let's block this IP. All right. And we can add people to the group. Now, we're not going to add Barry Allen to the group this time, but I can definitely add in Bruce Wayne and I can add in Simona, but she can't be trusted. All right, so you're going to add in an engineer, and then you can have an opportunity to have a Teams chat. Now, customers often ask me, well, does this start a Teams call or does this start a Teams chat? This starts a Teams chat. Of course, the call icon is in the top right-hand corner. You can click the button, but this starts a chat so that I can tell the firewall team to validate that this is an IP address that's not in our network. And of course, to go ahead and trigger the block utility if I'm not using automation to block these IPs. On top of that, I may want to add a task, right? Maybe I want to add a task that someone does their job in order to stop this from happening again, right? If the magic of Azure kicks in for me. So I want to add a task, and task is do your job. And for my description, I'm going to say don't have public-facing IPs, right? Use Azure Bastion or Jumpbox. I know someone's going to say, what about just-in-time access? Yes, Simone, I put JIT in there as well. All right, so I click save, and now I've added that task inside of my environment, right? Do your job, right? Created by me, it's in the environment. If I gave it to Barry Allen, now Barry Allen knows he needs to do his job and get rid of that public-facing IP address. Everybody's good with that, right? All right. Well, how does Microsoft help me with this, right? Well, Microsoft employs several different tools or solutions to help you with this as well. So if I go look at the IP address, right, it's going to bring in that user entity behavior analytics into this pane of glass. It's going to give me more information about that IP address if it exists, right? It's going to tell me where it came from. In this instance, it came from China. Now, did it actually come from China? Well, we don't know, right? This could be from the Tor or the Onion browser. This could be from proxy server. It's all based off this IP block, right? But it's telling me that it came from China. It tells me the last time, the first time it was seen, the last time it was seen, and the host that it was seen with. If there were multiple timelines for it, it will give me multiple timelines on it as well, and of course, additional insights. Now, I can do the same thing with my server, right? I want to look at this Linux server because this is the one that gets hit often. I want to see what's going on with it, right? Let's pop it out a little bit. If it lets me do it, but I think it froze up. All right. When I go to view full details on this Linux server, what it actually did was populate user entity behavior analytics, right? I got an error message here. Simona, nothing ever works on demo day. But I don't take credit for failures, so I will blame others. All right,
maybe it's your
let's see if it
Wi-Fi.
works this time. If it doesn't work this time, I'm just going to hand it over to Simona and just let her go with it, right? I'm ashamed everybody's looking at us. All right, so it's going to tell me everything I need to know about the server, right? The OS type, right? So now I can start building a profile, right? If I start to see that all the Ubuntu 16.04s are starting to get hit, right? Is there a unknown 0-day, or is there a known 0-day I don't know about that makes this a more exploitable OS type, right? It's going to tell me if it's domain joined or not. It's going to give me the private IP that it currently associated with, and of course, additional information to include my tagging. It's also going to tell me the last IP addresses that have actually logged into this machine. So it gives me an opportunity to see if I've had any compromises, right? Because some of those IPs may be brute force, right? And they actually got in. So those are things I can look at. And over time, I like to call this the Titanic theory. It lets me know how many alerts or anomalies I've had over time. Now, on top of that, remember that profile I was telling you that entity behavior is building for you, and then trying to determine if things are acting different to get closer to 0 days? That's what's on the right-hand side. That's just building this profile and attempting to help you with your investigation type, right? Now, from the incident itself, I can actually go in and do an investigation. So let's try it out. So I can do an investigation from the entity itself. It tells me I had a failed brute force. Can everybody see this, or should I zoom in a little further? That's a little too much. All right. Let's see if I hit the plus sign, if it does better. All right, that's better. All right, so it tells me all the entities that were involved, right? From there, I can highlight the actual entity, right? It allows me to see all the assigned IPs. All right, let's bring this around, right? I like to call this the web of deceit, right? But this is more about GUI investigation process, right? Allows you to see all the IPs. And from any one of these IPs, you can pull additional information. It just builds the profile, right? You can continue to fill out to see if any additional IPs were involved. You can see if any additional related alerts were involved. I'm sorry, I'm starting to expand past your view. Pull this in some. All right. I can also see what processes were running at the time that a brute force happened. Now, I just want you to use your imagination for a second. If this was ransomware and they hit this box, and this box attempted to call out to other machines, right? I can see all the machines and all the processes that were running at the time that this box started calling out for ransomware. So if we're talking about getting the patient zero a lot faster, the ability to tell them how big of an impact the ransomware have, and to do an isolation and containment that allows us to return to normal operation, this helps you get there a lot faster. Now, the utility I'm using is user entity behavior analytics. So now I'll go there real quick, because this is where we'll take a look back. Custom range. Let's stay with the 30-day range, and let's type in this character. Let's say Simona, right? Because remember, the preface of our whole entire engagement was that Simona said she didn't touch my environment, and that we were just going to do this training, and I had nothing to worry about, right? None of my charges were her charges, and she had not touched it. So let's take a look at what Simona has been doing in my environment. All right, so now I pull Simona's account because she said she hadn't been doing anything. Of course, it arrows out. She's probably doing something now. All right, so now I pull Simona's account. She says she hasn't been doing anything. And I'm looking back 30 days, right, to see if Simona has actually been doing things in my environment. All right, you start to see that Simona's been signing in forever. She says she doesn't sign in. You see, she's signing in every day over here, right? There's also alerts and incidents that Simona has been involved in because she's doing rare subscription level activities in my environment, right? I can go out and investigate what Simona is actually doing. This is part of that insider threat thing. Of course, I'm doing it in jest. We're using Simona as a scenario, but there she goes. Rare subscription activity. So what is Simona building in my environment, and what kind of chaos is she causing, right? Let's get some more intelligence about what Simona is doing. So what I'm going to do is enumerate what Simona's been doing. So first thing I want to do is see what device she has. Now, this is obfuscated to me based off PII or purview or utility, right? So we obfuscated her device so you don't know. Now, if I wanted to, which I'm not going to do because this is going to be recording, I can go ahead and publish her IP address where she's connecting from, the location she's connecting from, and we can all start a hack. But we're not going to do that, Simona. This is recorded. This is live. I'm going to leave you alone for now, but we've proven that you've been accessing my environment for the past 3 months. Evidence is there. All right. With that said, we've done a quick investigation. We've done analytic rules. I don't have much time left, but I do want to give Simona the opportunity to go over some automation. So back to you, Simona.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Somehow I'm both the threat actor and the analyst in this scenario, so maybe I'll have to recuse myself from one. Anyway, so we touched on the other two, right? So we did collect, we did respond or detect, and finally investigate. And now we're more on the response automation side of things. Really quick, I think Andre did mention Watchlists briefly. We're probably not going to have much time to cover them, but I'll just show you where they live here in the portal in Sentinel. So Watchlists are kind of like a whitelisting mechanism. So you could potentially take a look at here at the templates. So all these are a CSV file. So you go make it in Excel, you upload it, and then you point to what we call like a search key, a column that you can easily use to query and look through your logs for those whitelisted IP addresses or high value assets you specifically want to flag using the watch list. So it can have multiple use cases here. But a lot of times I see it for like VPN ranges that you want to whitelist that you expect traffic from to reduce those false positives, as an example. So there's a lot of watch list use cases that you can find in a lot of the docs that we've shared. So those are watch lists in a nutshell. And then the last step, of course, is our response or automation step, right? So as Andre pointed out, there are a lot of things you can take as an action after your incident is flagged or even during the incident creation process. He actually showed you what we call incident enrichment. This is done also via automation playbooks. So let me backtrack really fast. What is a playbook when we call it a playbook in Sentinel or in Defender for Cloud? It's actually just a logic app. So it's, if you ever had any experience with like power apps or that sort of thing where you do the low code setup, that's what a logic app is. And it has a trigger usually. The trigger in this case could be a new incident in Sentinel. So every time that trigger runs, then that logic app does some kind of action that you set it to do. So let me just show you a few. We actually have a lot of templates that you can use out of the box for third-party products, for our products as well. So you could do something like block a user in Azure Active Directory based on an alert or incident that you get in Sentinel. You could do something really simple like just notification. So you want an email sent out to a distribution list. You then want a Jira issue opened or a work item opened in whatever system you use, like ServiceNow. You can all do that here. You'll notice there's a lot of templates out of the box. So let's just look at some of the ones that we have active. We've deployed a lot of playbooks here. As you can see, let's take a look at one of these here. So this is the CSV report export. You'll notice off the bat, these are the runs for the logic app. So it's failed a few times and it last succeeded quite a while ago. I think I have a newer one I can show you, but basically just to show you what a logic app is and what it looks like, this is the designer that will come up for you. So you can go ahead and modify it. And so for this example, actually, let's go back to one that I think is a little better that I already had up for you. This is, there's two logic app design reviews. What you just saw was a new review. Both are valid for editing these logic apps or playbooks. Those are synonymous again. So you'll notice it starts with a trigger. Most commonly, we have the Sentinel incident trigger, or you can trigger off an alert or just an update to an incident as well. So not just new incidents, but updated ones can also cause this to run. And then in this case, what we're doing is we're pulling entities, what my colleague Andre showed you guys earlier with like the IP address information, the host information, the user information, that all goes into the entities array that is that exists in each new incident. So we're going into that entities array for that new incident that triggered this, and then we're pulling out some entity information for you here. It's creating a table with that information. And finally, I'm going to just skip to the good part. It's creating an email that will be sent out, and we're formatting it with dynamic content here. You see where my cursor is and all these little blue sections. Those are coming directly from that Sentinel incident payload, that JSON payload. And then finally, what happens is we send the email out with the incident details. I'm sending it to myself, but maybe I'll spam Andre later to as a payback for making me the threat actor and all these examples. So you can send this to your SOC team, whoever you want, and then you'll notice in the body of the email, we're just calling that output, which is the output from the earlier step. Basically, this whole email response will be sent. And so what this looks like, this is a super simple email. It will just basically send an email blast every time you get a new incident with the relevant entity information and a link to that incident, all in that email. It will be sent to whoever you specify. So my point here is that a logic app or playbook can be very simple like that, or it can be something much more involved, like blocking a user, isolating a machine, right? If you catch sort of a ransomware attack. Let's see what else we can show you really fast in terms of, pardon me, let me go back to the correct directory here. We have several here. So it can be a lot of things, right? Not just an email notification. And then once you have your playbook or your logic app deployed using one of those templates that we offer or customizing your own, what you want to do as a last step is create the automation rule that I think Rudney talked about in the chat. So you can, for example, create the automation rule here, and we'll call it email Andre. And so we can say every time that an incident is created or even updated or an alert is created, there's all these options for you. We'll just stick to the most common use case I see usually, which is incident creation. And then you can also have conditions to filter on. So if you only want to alert Andre on certain types of incidents, for example, ones that have to do with like Azure Active Directory incidents, or maybe just stuff for endpoint, for example, you could filter on several conditions here. So we can drop down and let's just add another and condition. And you'll notice you have all these options. So you could even filter by the name of the incident, by who it involves. So we could say every time it contains my name, right, then he'll be alerted, for example. And you can change this to and or logic, whatever you feel is necessary. And then finally, for this automation rule, in my example, we can run that playbook that we set up, the incident notification one. And then it'll actually give you all your available playbooks or logic apps that you can tie to this automation rule. So this is one action you can take. You'll notice I didn't cover the others. You could do something super simple like change the status of an incident. So we could say every time this logic is true here in the conditions section and a new incident is created, then go ahead and change the status of this particular incident. Or you could do change the severity to, I don't know, medium or high or low, whatever. Or you could just assign it a tag or an owner, like my colleague Renee mentioned. And then last thing I'll mention really fast is automation rules do have an order to them. You'll notice at the bottom. So basically they'll run in order in parallel. So if you want a more complex kind of process to be followed, like one action after another, I would recommend putting that all into one logic app or playbook, because what happens is you'll notice our order here. So let me just actually exit out of that I was editing. You'll see the order here. So first we'll do the isolate machine suspected of ransomware. It'll run that logic app. And then it usually waits a few minutes for that to start running. Then it starts running the next automation rule. If of course, the conditions in that automation rule apply to the incident in question. It'll keep running whatever applies to that particular trigger. But if you want more of like a nuance, like, wait for this to complete, then do this next step, like I said, move that all to a logic app or playbook. But these are really great to kind of, first send that email, then take action, then maybe enrich your incident, etc. I'll pause. Andre, do you want to add anything for automation as well?
Oh, no. There was a few questions in the chat I'll address. I know we have like 3 minutes left. We covered a lot of stuff in a short period of time. The first thing is Patrice's question about the ability to enable multiple analytic rules at one time. The answer is no, right? There's no click a button and then turn all the analytic rules on. UEBA is the closest thing you get to that. You can use our Azure DevOps utility or our IX solution that Simone is showing now on screen, which is tie in your repository from GitHub, from DevOps, and pull those analytic rules in to your environment, right? That's a way of enabling all at one time. Or you can do the old school method, which is via bicep or JSON template deployed against your Sentinel environment as well. And to Barry Allen's thing, because you're the fastest engineer I have. And yes, it is a Batman movie. But that's all I have, Simona.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes. And I think in conclusion, we've covered pretty much everything. Obviously, we couldn't get to all the points of Sentinel, but definitely check out the Ninja series that we linked in our collection of links. That will have all of the like 400 level learning for you, as well as some of the Custo kind of upskilling you can do to help you query the logs. Because I don't think Andre and I really got to this too much, but all your analytic rules are Custo queries under the hood. So you'll have to learn how to use the Qusto query language, and there's a lot of queries out of the box for you that you can check out and then run them on your logs. So yeah, I think that's it. Should we leave some time for more questions, or?
No, just post a summary slide.
Let me put the last slide up really fast for everyone. This is the collection that I was mentioning, by the way. If you scan the QR code, you can see some of the links. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for putting up with us. More so, Andre, I'm sure.